of 150 people and another 150 from the military and police.
Well, quite an unfortunate turn of events, and of course condolences to the family members in Indonesia. Well, of course, back home, we are taking a look at the maiden flight to the United States of America, particularly New York, and we also highlight the business benefits it might bring for Kenya and Africa as well. Joined in studio by Kenneth Kambona, who's the Chief Executive Officer of the International Development Consultant at the Development Shift Consulting Firm. Thank you so much for making time. Welcome to Bottom Line Africa.
Thank you.
Well, perhaps we can start on the good note. It is a big step for Africa and Kenya particularly. Perhaps this will be a good note for the bilateral relations between the United States of America and Kenya.
Sure, Jesse. I think first and foremost, that was a long flight, 15 hours.
Yes,
you know, I just remember yesterday when it was taking off, and then so they've been in the air for all that time. But it's good news that it arrived safely, and we thank God and everybody else who was involved in it. But now, beyond that, what is next? I think the main thing is, what are the benefits of that? It has taken many years. At one point, I was involved in this kind of working for the U.S. government. We were involved in trying to get this working, and it has taken like 6 to 7 years to do that. Now, why had it to be done, therefore, you know, with all the intrigues and complications that are involved? I think the first and foremost is, traditionally we've had U.S. as one of our biggest trading partners. The trade is not balanced yet, but we all know that as a result of former President Clinton, there was an act that was enacted to allow Africans to export to the U.S. duty-free and tariff-free, and therefore to promote trade. But that has not happened. And one of the reasons is that, you know, getting to the U.S. for business people has been a big problem, both in terms of regulations like visas and what have you, which fortunately when President Obama was here last time, he opened a window of 5 years where you could get a visa and then lasts you that long. Then now comes this direct flight, which is, I think, the pie in the cake, because right now you can therefore get your travel documents very quickly, and at the same time travel there in cutting off 7 hours of travel. Now, what does that mean to trade and business? First, you're able to, of course, do your things as fast as possible and then come back.
Yes,
so that's very important for a businessman.
Yeah.
But now trade is more about movement of both people and goods. And so long as we kept on utilizing other airlines, we really were not going to increase our growth in trade for the two countries. And mark you, there is no American airline which comes here direct too. So the two were like, there was a disconnect there. No Kenyan airline was going there direct, no American airline was coming here direct. So it is a big step that we started now going there direct, and therefore we should now focus as a country, as businessmen, on what really can we now export using the direct flight. I know there's something still going by sea and by other airlines, all right, but this is a major step in that direction.
Okay, that's Kenneth Kambona. We're obviously also joined by Atieno Ndomo by way of Skype. So perhaps just to take a look at your reaction. Of course, it is a milestone for Kenya and Africa as well. What say you about this inaugural flight and the presumption of the trade relations improving between the United States of America and Kenya as a country?
Thanks for having me. And I'll just echo what Ken was saying, that this has been waited for a very long time. I think a lot of effort has gone into making this possible. So to that extent, I think everybody is happy and relieved that it's finally happened. And obviously the possibilities are anticipated in terms of improved cargo rates, convenience of direct flight and the possibilities that bring with it. But I, for instance, would like to shed light on the aspect of reciprocity. One has to raise the question about the extent to which Kenya-US relations demonstrate a level of reciprocity that enables both countries to have benefits. So it has taken us this, where on the other hand, one feels like the US has had a lot of unhindered access to our airspace, to our waters. So the imbalance still remain, and one has to ask themselves, what are the real barriers to a genuine reciprocal relationship where both nations accrue benefits? Obviously, some of it will be things that we ourselves do to ensure that we get the most benefits from, for instance, the flight. I am interested in the aspect of security. I know that most Kenyans who travel know the extent to which they made changes to the airport, including the fact that before you access JKIA these days, if you're a traveler, you literally have to get out of your vehicle and walk through security. Never mind that you're going to go through stringent security checks inside the airport itself. And I, for instance, asked the question: why is it installed proper security checks? Why is it that passengers are subjected to a physical check outside of the airport, whereas the drivers of the cars don't do the same? If the checks are able to, look at the vehicle, why is it not possible to check at the vehicle and its contents? I raise this only to the extent that it matters the sort of hostility that people may feel when they come into Stockholm. So it may be very well that we have flights going into the US, but if people's experiences arriving is that going through immigration, going through customs feels more hostility, welcoming, reception, or warmth, then some people will think twice, because people have options in terms of the choices they make about where they go. So if we're looking out to attract tourists and to attract investment, we also have to pay attention to the aspect of the level of reception and welcome that people receive when they come. You can have a balance between enforcing security while at the same time retaining a certain measure of welcome and warmth. And as Africans, traditionally, we like to feel that when our visitors come, that we welcome them. But also as citizens, it is nice to come in through the airport, leave the airport and feel like it wasn't a process that was very important.
Of course, very valid points raised by Atieno right there. Perhaps we can pick up on, as you well know, the aggregate trade between the US and Kenya last year amounted to 102 billion Kenya shillings. Well, of course, Kenya got only 45 billion compared to what the US got, 57.2 billion Kenya shillings. Now, we actually take advantage of this maiden flight, of also taking a look at the Goa trade when we're talking about the trade pact where we can actually export duty-free goods to the United States of America.
And thanks for the sentiments made by Atieno. And hi, Atieno, it's morning there, we afternoon now. I think we know we have that imbalance. And why is that imbalance there? Because I think in most cases, it is either we have never quite exerted ourselves as a country and said, no, this is what you need to import from us, this level of processed goods or manufactured goods, unlike what we now have. Right now, the majority of our exports are textile-based. And of course, yeah, they're manufactured and that's, but I think that's not all we can offer. We should now, with this kind of engagement, start looking at where else do we really have a comparative advantage. With cotton, yes. With textile, yes. U.S. also has, a lot of cotton products and what have you. So really, it is due to AGOA that we are getting that niche. But now, where can we focus so that we take advantage of our comparative? I mean, we use our comparative advantage. The first one, I think, is things that we traditionally, the U.S. must get from us. Coffee is one of them. I'm just using that as an example. Tea is another one. And then we come to things like traditional home decors or certain agricultural produce like, traditional. I know we have a very big diaspora community in the U.S. that could benefit from some of these traditional vegetables. Then we would go to the level of what about things like African decor, home decor, things that we literally, would require. Now, perhaps it is too much to think that a single aircraft movement would really increase that to the level that I think it is an opportunity for us to really start looking at ourselves. Who knows about Goa except for certain cadre of high-profile business people, who sell textile? What about the middle level? Are they prepared? Have they been prepared adequately to take advantage of AGOA? The answer is no. And those are now the focal points that we should look at. And the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Ministry of External Trade or International Trade must now relook at. The trip is nice and the fanfare is going to go, but now the next thing is how do we prepare our people adequately to take advantage of that? And I've just mentioned a few of those, goods and items, yeah.
Well, that's definite. Let's engage Atieno, policy analyst, and I'm sure this also touches on your expertise. Let's take a look at the Kenyan nationals living abroad and how they will actually want to invest back at home in order to boost the GDP. We'll also take a look at foreign investments and opportunities for foreign investors to come back to Kenya and invest in the country. Well, it has been pipped as a good move for Kenya to actually induce foreign investors to come back and invest in Kenya. But have the policies been set down? Has everything been laid to facilitate this particular move in order for Kenya to win big, not just from the United States of America, but the whole of the West?
Good question. I think that I will underscore the fact that this perhaps represents possibilities. But to actually reap dividends will require additional steps. So, back to the point I was making earlier, the focus on use this to boost tourism numbers and figures. You have to have a holistic outlook. So, over and above having a direct, convenient flight that might boost the numbers in terms of people coming from either way, is then you also want to make sure that the experience is a holistic one. So for instance, we know that our service industry back home is quite well developed in terms of the human resource personnel. So people who are well-traveled will tell you that generally speaking, Kenyans are very good with service. So when you go to our hotels and all of that, you get, professional service. So, we may score a tick there. But you want to make sure, for instance, that the road infrastructure works so that transfers from JKIA, for instance, you don't want to do the flight and then once you land, back to the point I was making earlier, you go through a very hostile reception through customs and immigration, and then you arrive and then you hit traffic from right outside of the airport and all the way into the CBD or beyond. So one has to also focus on those aspects so that you're having a holistic attempt at making it an interesting and worthwhile experience for people who choose to come to Kenya, because it is a choice. The reality check is that the airline industry, for instance, is a very competitive one. And I think in your intro, you mentioned that Kenya joins a list of other African countries who have had direct flights to the US for a number of years. Flights out of Ghana, flights out of South Africa, Ethiopian Airlines just next door does a couple of US cities. So I'm sure that KQ knows this. They still have to do further work in terms of making links with local domestic air, because you have travelers being fed to use this flight. So in my view, I guess a whole lot more work remains to be done. We all look at the US at the moment, and we realize that there's a lot of changes in terms of the way they're positioning vis-a-vis their foreign policy and all of that. Foreign policy is always about strategic interests. The US will be looking out for their own interests. As Kenyans, we have to define what that interest is and seek to pursue it. And in my view, a lot of the answers are actually with us domestically. This policy making. Are we seeing our priorities right? And once we do that, doing it honest. Those are the things that will make a difference. So it's more than just having the flight. It's about all the other things that are being done to make sure that this possibility actually reaps the benefits that we would like it to do. And that will not happen if we don't, streamline some very basic things. And so I will belabor the point about security. Security, in my view, is more about intelligence and how you use it than the hardware per se. I lived in Addis for a little while, and Addis Ababa, like us, perhaps is exposed to a lot of terror threats and all of that. But if you see the way the Ethiopians enforce security, it's about how they use intelligence. You actually probably will not notice how much effort goes into it, but you live in Addis, you know that as you walk the streets, you almost can feel the level to which every citizen is somebody who can give intelligence to the security agencies to use it. So you don't have to construct. My impression of our airport lately is that it is pretty hostile. And if I sound like I'm belaboring the point, I think that is a point that is worth looking at. It's difficult to know how you navigate when you arrive. The barriers around the termini, even when you get dropped off, as somebody who's traveling, it's almost difficult to know how you navigate. So I think there would have been a better balance between trying to make people feel secure while at the same time retaining a lot of, friendliness and access, pleasant experience.
Thank you for your input. Atieno Domo, actually a policy analyst, giving us a rough perspective of actually what to expect, not just the ground level of this maiden flight having particular advantages to Kenya and Africa at large, but also the number of policies we have to make, the nitty-gritty details we have to ensure are smooth. I will also be joined by Felix Okach, who's a multilateral trade expert. But before we engage with him, she brought out the fact that the couple of African countries who already have the direct flights ticket to the United States of America. And of course, it is a business at the end of the day. We well know of the financial troubles that the national carrier Kenya Airways has been facing. The last year half-year results were actually 4 billion, amounting to losses in the half-year ending June. Might this perhaps be a way to alleviate the tough financial challenges in the national carrier Kenya Airways?
Yeah, that's a very good point, and I think I want to look at it from the prism of the East African community. Now, Kenya, and like Atieno has mentioned, there are other countries that are already doing that business. They have the experience, they have that. But we probably also have one clear advantage, that when you look around us, save for Ethiopia, the rest of the countries, let's say the East African community per se, the 5 countries, 6 countries now, really rely on Kenya as the hub for their real international travels. I mean, Tanzania, people come here and then go there. So the other thing, just direct benefits to Kenya, and also stems from us, we must now develop our way of handling our regional neighbors so that they feel that this is still the place to go. They don't go to Ethiopia, they don't go to maybe South Africa to take the direct flight, but they make Kenya their hub. And we already poised for that. We are the largest economy right now, save the other challenges that we have. Yeah. That's that we sort for sure. So if we take that perspective that we are the East African, Rwandese would like to go to the US through our country, so we would, Tanzanians, Ugandans, so would anybody in the region, Burundi, and even DR Congo people, if I may extend it that far. So let's, number one, make sure now we have seamless ways of getting these people, and of course that links to security too.
Yeah.
of getting them through via our countries and not having, like we had some nationals from this country a few days ago who are here and nobody seems to really know their, what was happening.
Okay.
It was unfortunate. So those are the things we really need to now look at. But I want to re-emphasize that we really stand a very good, we stand in a position to let me just use, but to dominate the regional hub in terms of international air traffic. Of course, we must always, every day, be content of Ethiopia. They have a long history in aviation, and they're a brand in the world, but we still have that chance too.
We definitely do.
Yeah,
And
yes.
perhaps let's engage Felix Okach, who is a multilateral trade expert. Of course, if you have been listening to the conversation, of which I presume you have done, the United States remains Kenya's leading source of market for tourists, with approximately 114,507 tourists coming from the United States of America. In terms of positioning Kenya as the gateway to the East African community, what steps do we need to take? Yes, we have the inaugural maiden flight from Kenya to the United States, direct flight to New York. But what steps do we need to make to ensure that, yes, despite the competition from Ethiopia or Mauritius or South Africa, that we not as a gateway to the East African community, but as the gateway, rather, to the sub-Saharan African area as well?
Thank you very much for welcoming me on this studio. Of course, I'm in Mombasa. First of all, let me take this opportunity to send a message of best wishes to children in KCP and KCSC. Now, the issue of Kenya, the U.S. and Dr. has just mentioned, it is for us, but we have challenges. The challenge is like housekeeping. So, the other day when it was to start, they have not paid their workers the issues, and these issues must spread beyond. That's one. Two, we have neighboring countries whom we should use to take care of so that we exploit the U.S. market. I don't think it is coming out clearly. But the opportunities in the U.S. are much for us. Three scenarios. First of all, the coming in of tourists. Two, it is our opportunity for us now to export flowers directly